morning, Rabbi Sai. Thank you for bearing with us. We set everything up. This is Rabbi Kalman Akiva Kovacs filling in for Rabbi Silber. When Rabbi Silber asked me to do Shabbos and Sunday's Daf, I didn't know we were doing Shchutei Chutz yet, so I'm very excited because I love Shchutei Chutz. Not that I love slaughtering sacrificial animals outside the temple, but the topic we're going to find out is really, it's an amazing topic, and there's a lot of Musar to learn from it. We're going to start with the sponsorships. We have a Talmud Torah sponsorship by Adam and Yudit Ben Zev in honor of their children, Jake, Serena, and Rosie. A Daf Yomi sponsorship by the Plunka family in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Menachem Mendel ben Levi Yitzchak Zal. That's the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Wow. So can I get $1? Can I get $1? So it's very chashuv. Week of Learning sponsor by Yehuda and Jennifer Goodhart in commemoration of the yahrzeit Jennifer's father, Yeshaya Zalman ben Lazar Zal. Thank you to all our sponsors. Today's daf is Samech Gimel 63. We're picking up on the bottom of Samech Base as B'Kol Ram, he says. I'm wearing a microphone. Okay, come closer. Doctors, all right, come on up. I'm not going to bite you. Very good. He doesn't know if I'm going to bite him. All right, very good. So, in the end of Shchutei Chutz, we started to mention, we were talking about the two Seirim, the two goats. Remember yesterday we darshaned, Seirim is plural, it's already two, so Shnei Seirim means a pair of goats. Lechatchila, we want to get matching goats, but we learned out even if they're not matching, you're still Yotzei, but we try to get them matching, and we compared the birds and the Kivsei, Kavasim for the Mitzvah as well, and the Tamidim as well, the daily offerings, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, should be matching as much as we can, but if you're not matching, we learned out it's okay. We said the carbon musaf of Shabbat really should be matching because we don't have another ribui to add on that you can get away with not matching. Then we mentioned this, we got back to the two goats, we mentioned Shchutei Chutz. So I'm actually going to pick it up there, and we are 9 lines up. Tana Rabbanan, Shnei Sirei Yom Kippurim. So the two goats of Yom Kippur, Sheshachatan B'chutz, that they slaughtered them outside the temple. And there's an Isser of Shchutei Chutz, there's an Isser of Karet. We're going to bring the pasuk, don't worry, we're going to talk all about it. It applies to any animal that could be a sacrificial animal. So a lot of today's daf is going to focus on, well, if it really can't be a sacrifice, he should be pater on Shchutei Chutz and not be chayav kares at all. So these two, in this case, the two goats of Yom Kippur, he slaughtered both of them outside, ad shelo higril, before the hagrala, before the lottery to pick which one's which. Ad shelo higril aleichem, chayav al shneim, is chayav on both of them. Misha higril aleichem, chayav al shel shem. After you do the lottery, you're only chayav for the goat, which is lashem. Well, pater al shel lazazel, and you're pater on the sir lazazel because it's not really a carbon. It's not brought as a carbon in the temple. It's thrown off a cliff. Ad shelo higril aleichem, the Gemara asks chayav al shneim. Why is he chayav on both of them? Lamai chazu. For what carbon are they fitting? In the temple, you're only chayav shchutei chutz bosai if it could be a carbon in the temple. And once you've done the hagrala, one of them sir lazazel, one of them sir lashem. You should only be chayav one there. You'll only be chayav if you bring it as a carbon in the temple. Amar Chisda hovrai l'sir nasei b'chutz, because it could be the sir nasei b'chutz. That means the musaf sir. So the sir lifnim, that's the first sir. The sir lashem is also the sir lifnim because you bring the blood lifnim. You bring the blood inside the building. But the sir naseh b'chutz, you do everything, the blood and the animal outside. That's the chatas for the musaf of Yom Kippur. Maishna l'sir naseh b'fneim, and why not the sir that's done inside? Delay, that it couldn't, this animal you slaughtered outside couldn't be the sir done inside. That's the first sir, the sir lashem. The b'chutz hagrala, because that's lacking hagrala. If you haven't done the hagrala yet, you can't bring this animal as a sir lashem. The sir naseh b'chutz. So the sir naseh b'chutz nami lo chazeh de mechazer avoda tayom. It's lacking the avoda of the day because the musaf comes after the other, all the other things you're talking about, the chafina of ketoret and the blood applications. All of these things, the musaf is after. So Rav Chisda ein mechutzer zman b'bayom. So Rav Chisda said, we read this yesterday. Stop there. That Rav Chisda says if it's the same day service we call it. So he does the service of shechita, and then they would keep the blood around until it's time to do the musaf. It's interesting. We say the ma'isa that's lacking is the hagrala. You haven't done hagrala yet, so you can't bring the sir b'fnim. Rambam actually says vidui. Rambam says the ma'isa that's lacking is the vidui. The Ravid screams at him, doesn't scream at him. The Ravid says, Chaye Roshi, what are you talking about, Rambam? It's a mistake. But you should know, this is important for Yom Kippur, and we're slowly creeping towards Elul. We're both sides, getting to be the middle of summer. Elul is on the horizon. And you should know, in Chilchos Tshuva, the Rambam says, Tshuva, the Iker part, the Iker Maseh, the action of Tshuva is the Vidui. So this is Rambam L'Shitatu. He says the Vidui is the Maisa of Tshuva. Of course, Tshuva is mostly, you understand, believe in your mind, your machshavot, your midot, but he says the Vidui is the necessary step. According to the Rambam of Tshuva, so too he says the Vidui is that action that makes the seer Lashem. We also have vidui on the seer Lazazel, we're going to see. So that's a necessary step. So good. So Amar Ravina, Hashta Damar Chista, Mechusar Hagrala, Kim Mechusar Maise. So a lack of the lottery. You haven't done the lottery yet, it's Mechusar Maseh. Mechusar Maseh Dame, and therefore you'd be pater on Shchutei Chutz because you haven't done all the necessary actions. We say Maseh here means an action necessary for the carbon to be a real carbon in the temple. Hadam Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, Shlamim, so on a similar vein, we have a Shlamim, Sheshchatan Kodim Shniftu Dlato, Tahechel. What if you slaughtered a Shlamim before you opened the doors of the temple? Pesulim, it's puzzle. It's not a kosher Shlamim. Shneamar, why? Well, the Shlamim, it says, Shchatu Petach Ohel Moed. You will slaughter it at the entrance, the Petach of Ohel Moed, of the tent of meeting, the tabernacle. Bizman Shehu Patuach. This implies only when the Petach is Patuach. V'lo Bizman Shehu Na'ul. Interesting note, in the Hilchot of Yichud, the halacha of man and woman being alone together, there's a heter, an alleviating circumstance called Petach Patuach. Yershut Rabbi Pesach Pasuach, Petach Patuach. If the door is open, or at least unlocked, to a public thoroughfare, then the people inside the house are going to be less likely to have anything untoward occurring there. So that's one of the alleviating factors. But consult your local posech about Yichud Shilas, but that's just the Zlashon Petach Patuach. When the doors are open, that's when a shlamim can be kosher. If the doors are closed, it's puzzle. Turning over the top of Samach Gimel, Shratan B'chutz, if they slaughtered the shlamim outside the temple, Kodem Shniftu Dlatot, before they open the doors of the Heichal, Pater. Because it can't be Shchutei Chutz unless it could be a valid carbon. If the doors are closed, it can't be a valid shlamim. So if he did a Shchutei Chutz, shouldn't have done that. It's not a good thing. It's wasting a carbon. But he's Pater on the Shchutei Chutz aspect. We don't give him a karis. My time in mechusar peticha ke mechusar ma'asidami, that the lack of opening the doors to the temple is like a lack of the maseh, a lack of action that's required to make this a valid shlamim. So, interestingly, in Zvachim, Samach Aleph, Rashi there says this is only the shlamim. It says only the shlamim has this halacha that the doors have to be open. Tosfos says no, it should be everything. I mean, why are you machalek? It should be every carbon. As we learned already remember Tamid Nishchat, we learned very early in the morning on Yom Kippur, they would get ready to do the Tamid, and as soon as it was, remember to say Barkai, as soon as it was the crack of dawn, they would open the doors. And then everyone would do the lots for the Tamid and the Trumas Hadeshin first, but the opening of the doors was one of those steps we saw at the crack of dawn early in the morning when they were about to do the Shechita of the Tamid. So Tosfos says everything needs this. And the Netziv actually says, interestingly, it could be that the Zrika of Al Karbanot needs to occur when the doors are opened. But davka by the shlamim, we also need the shechita, because the shlamim is any place in the Azara. It's kachim kalim, and the owners eat all the meat, and it's sort of less of a carbon. Less goes up on the mizbeach, and more gets kept for your own personal use, and it can be slaughtered anywhere. So it's really the shechita also should be more linked to the Beit HaMikdash, or to the Mishkan at least. So it has to be patuach. That's why the Netziv says over there. But this is machlokas Rashi Tosfos if this doors open issue applies to al karbanot or davka the shlamim. Good. So mi it le Rav Chisda hoel. Does Rav Chisda say hoel? So hoel means since, and we use hoel in different contexts in Shas, but here it means since it's lacking a maisa to be ready as a carbon inside. So since that's lacking, it can't be a carbon right now. It also is pater on shchutei chutz. If someone slaughtered it outside the temple, they're not chayev carbs. V'hamar Rav Chisda Pesach, a carbon Pesach sheshchatu b'chutz, that he slaughtered it b'chutz. Bishar Yomot Hashana, and it was not Yud Daled Nisan. Lishmo, and he slaughtered it for the sake of a Pesach, Pater. He's not Chayev Shchutei Chutz for this Pesach, done L'Shem Pesach, outside the temple, and it's not Yud Daled Nisan, which is the only day a Pesach Lishmo is actually a kosher carbon. Good. Shalol Lishmo Chayev, but Shalol Lishmo, he slaughtered it for the sake of a Shlamim, because you know a Pesach, a leftover Pesach after Passover is now a Shlamim. We're going to see there's actually a debate if that's automatic or if he has to actually actively change me'aker, the original designation. Time of the shelo lishmo, so he's only chayav because it's lo lishmo, because he's changing the kavana, he's changing the label of this animal into a shlamim. Ha-stama, but stam, if he's just slaughtering it b'chutz and he doesn't really have any intention lishmo, it should still be l'shem Pesach. It should keep his original designation if he's not actively undoing that original Pesach designation. Stam lishmohu, pater, and he should be pater if it's stam. If he didn't make any active change in the designation of this Pesach after Passover, he should be pater and shchutei chutz because it's still a Passover, and Passover after Yud Daled B'Nisan, l'shem Pesach, it's not a valid carbon. Actually, it's actually the first Daf in Zvachim we learn this, that only a Chatas and a Pesach have to be Lishma, to be kosher, to be accepted b'diavad, and all other karbanot, if they're not Lishma, they don't count for the Bailim. It's the first Daf in Zvachim, but we still bring them up on the Mizbeach. Amai, so why is this? Leima hoil. Why don't we say hoil, since v'roi shelo lishmo, it would be fitting lo lishmo, this Pesach, if you change it lo lishmo, you change it into a shlamim, bifnim, to be brought into the temple. If he brought this into the temple and shechted it lo lishma, now he shechted it for a shlamim instead of a Pesach, changes that designation, it would be a kosher carbon. So why is he putter on shchutei chutz for slaughtering it stam? Hachi hashta, is this the same thing? Chasam bayakira. So there, it needs to be changed. So there, by the Pesach, you have to actively change the designation. So this opinion holds, we're going to see there's a machloket, but this opinion holds, you have to actually change the designation of your carbon Pesach into a shlamim after Passover. If you have a leftover Pesach, remember we said yesterday, sometimes the group lost their Pesach, and then so they designated a second one, a backup Pesach, and they found the original, and they have two of them. So remember, it was a machlokas, do we use the first one or the second one? So Yossi said, you should use the first one as long as the second one's not better. The Chachamim said, use the second one, but you might have a leftover Pesach. So this Mandamar holds you have to uproot, actively change it to a shlamim. So after Yodala ben Nisan, you have to change it to a shlamim to make it a real carbon. Therefore, as long as he hadn't actively uprooted the original designation of a Pesach, and he's doing shchutei chutz, he's pater on shchutei chutz because it's not a real carbon until he changes that designation. Hi lo by akira, but this one, going back to the goats of Yom Kippur, doesn't need an akira to change it. Why? Because the musaf of Yom Kippur is also called a chatas. So the sir pnimi, the sir lashem, is called a chatas. It's a chatas for all of Am Yisrael. Remember, the par is for the Kohen Gadol and the Kohanim, and the sir is for all of Am Yisrael. It's a chatas, but the musaf is also a chatas. So musaf is, interestingly, all these korbanot are in emor, but the musafin for all of the holidays, even Yom Kippur, are in Pinchas. So in Pinchas we say that this musaf is also a chatas. So Rabba Bar Shimi matnei la lehu b'derabba. So he said that Rabba said this, not Rabbi Yochanan. V'kasha le derabba, and he had this kasha on him of derabba. Meshana gidushanina. So he taught this as Rabba had this kasha, and he resolved it like we said that the Pesach Shelo Lishma is not the same as the goats of Yom Kippur, because by the goats you don't have to change designation. They're always a chatas. But by the Pesach you have to actively change it into a shlamim to change the designation, to have it be a real carbon, to be chayev for shchutei chutz. He also, Rav Dimi, so it's fun. So Rav Dimi was from Bavel. He went to learn in Eretz Yisrael. So it says, he also, when he came back from Eretz Yisrael, and whenever we see Rav Dimi, we're going to see Ravin next, because it seems Rav Dimi went there first, and then Ravin went there next, and came back and brought different versions of the teachings. We're going to have both Rav Dimi and Ravin. They both were from Bavel, went to Eretz Yisrael, and came back and taught dinim that they learned in Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. So see, it's not just our kids that go to Israel. They used to do that in Bavel too. So Amar Rav Yirmi, Amar Rav Yochanan, Pesach, Sheshchatu b'chutz, b'shar yimos hashana. Again, a Pesach that's left over, and it's not Yadal ben Nisan anymore. Bein lishmo, ben shelo lishmo, pater. He says he's always pater on shchutei chutz, whether or not he slaughters it for the sake of a Pesach or the sake of a shlamim. Amar Rav Dimi, Amritu l'shmai tekmei Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rav Dimi says, I taught this in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah. He came back to Yeshiva with Rabbi Yirmiyah, and he brought this teaching to Eretz Israel, and he said, Bish lama lishmo. I understand. Lishmo, it should be pater. Tahalo chazile, because after Yudal ben Nisan, it's not a fit carbon. If you slaughter a Pesach, l'shem Pesach, not on Yudal ben Nisan, that's not a carbon. It has to be, you'd have to change it into a shlamim for it to be a good carbon. But l'shem Pesach is not a good carbon, therefore it should be pater on shchutei chutz, because it wouldn't be a valid carbon inside. As shelo lishmo, if you've already done shelo lishmo, which means l'shem shlamim in this case, amai. So why is he pater on shchutei chutz? Hai chazeh shelo lishmo b'fneim. Because if he brought it into the temple and slaughtered it for shlamim, it's a kosher shlamim. A leftover Pesach is kosher as a shlamim. So he holds you could bring it inside. So he should be chayev on a Pesach after Yudal ben Nisan shelo lishmo. He should be chayev shchutei chutz. It would be a valid carbon inside. Amar li, and Rav Yirmiyah told me back, says Rav Dimi, akirat chutz lav shma akira. That trying to change the designation of a carbon Pesach outside the temple, it's not valid. It doesn't accomplish anything. That only bringing it into the temple and then changing it into a shlamim, according to Rav Yirmiyah, that's what can uproot the designation, the original Pesach designation, and make it now into a real kosher shlamim. And if you bring it to the temple, then it's beautiful, it's a kosher shlamim. But if he does shchutei chutz now, he brings it back outside the temple, nebuch, then he's chayiv kares, because now it's a real shchutei chutz, because he's really changed the designation, but it has to take place inside the temple. He also Ravin, when Ravin came back from his year in Eretz Yisrael in Yeshiva, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, he said to Rabbi Yirmiyah, he said in the name of Rabbi Yirmiyah, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Pesach, you see, is a totally different version. So it could be that in the meantime, Rabbi Yochanan maybe retracted or taught differently or worked out why the halacha should not be like the original version. Pesach sheshachatu b'chutz, a Pesach slaughtered outside, b'shar yimot hashana, not Yudal b'Nisan the rest of the year. Bein lishmo, whether it's for the sake of a Pesach, bein shelo lishmo, or the sake of a shlamim, chayiv on shchutei chutz, and he's going to explain why these could be valid carbon, and therefore you should be chayiv on shchutei chutz using the principle of hoil. Since you could have brought it in, you should be chayiv when he didn't bring it in. Afilu lishmo, even for the sake of a Pesach, which normally is only good in Yadalit Nisan. Vatnan, but there's a Mishnah that seems to be against this conclusion. Mechusar zman, something which is lacking in time. We're going to explain bein begufo, bein bebailim. So bein begufo, Rashi says this carbon is 7 days old or less. We know that a carbon has to have shivas yamim tachazima, and then it's yirotze, and then it could be a valid carbon. We're actually going to bring that pasuk on Amud Beis about mechusar zman for Sir Lazozel, but an animal has to live a full week. An animal has to experience a week of life, including a Shabbos. A Shabbos is a special koach, has to experience a Shabbos in a whole week before it can be designated and used as a carbon. So mechusar zman means it's lacking in time. It's not time yet that this animal is fit to be a carbon. Or it's mechusar zman bebailim. Mechusar zman bebailim. The Gemara explains hazava yoledes hamasora, because these have a tahara process. By the zav and metzora, it's a 7 days. They have 7 clean days situation, and then they bring their karbanos. By the yoledes, you know how many days before she brings her karbanos? It depends, boy or girl. Beautiful. How about a boy? 7. So there's 7. There's 7 days, and then there's 33 days. So it's a total of 40, and then she brings her karbanos, and by a girl, it's 80 days. So good. So she has quite a bit longer. But if she's saying before this time, it's not valid as a carbon. We're going to see. So shehigrivu chatatam va'ashamam. So the zava yoledes mitzora, and they brought their karbanot, their chatas or their asham, b'chutz, before their time, because they're 7 days, or their 40, 80 days hasn't arrived yet. Paturim, they're patur, because they're bringing their chatas and their asham, which they have to bring after the set time. They're bringing it too early. So they're patur on shchutei chutz. Yeah, they shouldn't have done that, but they don't get kares for shchutei chutz because it wasn't a valid carbon yet, because it's lacking in the time. It's mechusar zman relative to their need to bring this chatas or asham. And Rashi says a chatas and asham can't come in a dava. You can't donate them. Or compare, the Gemara goes on, olotehem shalmechem b'chutz hayavin. If they bring their ola or their shlamim early, they'd be chayav, because these can come as a nedava. You could donate these, Rabbi Sai. So if they did shchutei chutz early, they'd be chayiv on shchutei chutz, because they could have brought it into the temple and just made a nedava of an ola or shlamim, even though they do have to bring their ola or their shlamim. Well, the ola is for the nazir, but the shlamim for all the rest of them. Rashi explains if they brought it early, it would just be a nedava. So they'd be chayiv on shchutei chutz as for hoil, since they could have brought it in even though they're early. Rav Chilkiah Bar Tuvi lo shanu. Rav Chilkiah Bar Tuvi doesn't make it. He differentiate. Elo lishmo. He says only by lishmo, only a Pesach l'shem Pesach. Aval shalo lishmo. If it was slaughtered shalo lishmo, not the Pesach. Sorry, these offerings chayiv. So he says if these offerings of the zav zava yoledes mitzora were done lishmo for the sake of their chatas or asham, and they're done outside, and they're done too early mechusar zman, so then they're pater. We understand. Shelo lishmo, if he's changing the designation and trying to make them into an adava, trying to make them into a shlamim, chayev. It should be chayev, because however they could bring them into the Beis Hamikdash to be a shlamim. Lishmo miha pater, but lishmo, their chatas or asham brought early for the sake of their chatas or asham, would be pater. Amai, why should they be pater? Nema hoel v'royin shelo lishmon. But you could change their designation. Hoel, since you could change their designation to a shlamim, and you, since you could do that and bring them bifnim, then they should be chayev on shchutei chutz, even though they're mechusar zman. Even though it's like we said, mechusar ma'isa we started with, now we're in mechusar zman. It shouldn't be a carbon yet, but since you could have brought it in and changed the designation, could be a carbon, they should be chayev shchutei chutz. Hachi chashta is the same thing. Hasam by akira. There, it needs active changing of the designation by their chatas or their asham of the mitzora, yoledes, zav, zava. You'd have to actively change your designation to a shlamim. Hacha Pesach b'shar Yemos Hashana shlamim ninhu. So this, here he holds the Pesach automatically changes. Above we said the Pesach needs an Akira. That was the first opinion from Rabbi Yochanan. And this version of Rabbi Yochanan, he says the Pesach b'shar Yemos Hashana shlamim ninhu means it automatically becomes a shlamim. After Yadalad ben Nisan, he holds that a leftover Pesach is automatically a shlamim. You wouldn't have to actively go in and uproot the original designation. It becomes a shlamim, and therefore you'd be chayiv on shchutei chutz. So it's not the same as these zav, zava, yoledis, and metzora. Rav Ashi matnei chayiv. Rav Ashi teaches chayiv kitamrinan, as we taught above. Rav Yemi difti matnei pater. He says pater. Why? Because savar Pesach b'shar yimot hashana by Akira. He holds Pesach does not automatically change the shlamim; it needs an active changing. And he also holds ve'akira chutz lav shma akira, and changing the designation outside the temple accomplishes nothing. You'd have to go in the temple, change the designation, and then to be chayiv shchutei chutz, bring it back out of the temple and slaughter it outside of the temple to be chayiv on shchutei chutz there. Opliga de Rav Chilkiah bar Tuvi, and he disagrees with Rav Chilkiah bar Tuvi that it's an automatic change of designation. Amar Mar Misha Higri Aleim Chayev. Once you've done the Hagrola, he's Chayev on the seer. Remember, he's Chayev al Shel Shem, Upater al Shel Azazel. So now we're going to get into Shchutei Chutz, and really the pasuk of Shchutei Chutz, we've been in it all along. Tana Rabbanan Ish Mi Beit Yisrael Asher Yishchat Shor O Chesiv O Ez B'Machanei O Asher Yishchat Mechutz L'Machanei Vel Petach El Moed Lo Heviu L'Hakriv Korban L'Hashem. So hold on, we're going to pull out the pasuk. And we're going to. This is an amazing pasuk. So it says, "This is the matter Hashem has commanded, saying, any man from the house of Israel will slaughter an ox, sheep, or goat in the camp or outside the camp, and he has not brought it to the entrance of the tent of meeting." Remember this Pesach El Moed, to bring it as an offering to Hashem before the tabernacle of Hashem. It shall be considered as bloodshed for that man. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from the midst of his people. So we see that meat is murder. Meat is murder, Rabosai. So what's going on? It's also interesting, this command comes right after all of the commandments in Achrei Mos of the Yom Kippur. So we go through the whole Yom Kippur Avoda, and then we bring this pasuk about Shchutei Chutz, and that Shchutei Chutz, slaughtering an animal during that time in the desert, was considered to be bloodshed. And what was expected was that if you wanted to eat meat in the desert, you would bring it as a shlamim in the Mishkan. And if you did otherwise to an actual animal, then it was considered as bloodshed. This is actually why Hashem sent, when people wanted meat, what did Hashem send? Slav, birds. And these slav, these quail, whatever they are, they're not a carbon. So they could actually be slaughtered outside the tabernacle, because otherwise you'd have this humongous line at the Mishkan, and everyone wants to have fleishings for supper. They'd have a terrible line. So that's why Hashem sent slav, so they could do the shechita of the slav anywhere in the camp, because they weren't a species that could be in the Mishkan. But otherwise, if you're bringing an ox, sheep, or goat, you have to bring it as a shlamim in the time of the 40 years in the wilderness. Once they got to Eretz Yisrael, there was a heter to slaughter meat anywhere. Even in Yerushalayim, you didn't have to bring it as a shlamim. But at this time, meat was murder. And why is this? Why is meat murder? So there's an amazing Gemara, and it's a shtickle review of Pesachim. It wasn't that long ago, and it's Pesachim Daf Memtes, and it's a famous daf about an Am Haaretz, and it says, listen guys, don't let your daughter marry an Am Haaretz, stay away from this, but it says, it's a beautiful thing, Tanya Rebbe Omer, Am Haaretz Asr Lechol Basar, an Am Haaretz, an unlearned man can't eat meat. Shenamar, Zot Torat HaBehema Ve'of. So his drasha is, Kol Osek B'Torah, Mutter Lechol Basar Behema Ve'of. Kol She'eno Osek B'Torah, Asr Lechol Basar Behema Ve'of. So minadin, so you understand, he's saying lifnei mishrasadin. We don't paskin like this. We let anybody eat meat, but minadin from a strict letter of the law, an Am Haaretz, someone who doesn't learn Torah, shouldn't eat meat. For him, meat is murder. So why is this? There's a Maharal. And the Maharal goes through, there's different levels of existence. There's the domem, the silent, that's minerals, inanimate objects. And there's the tzomeach, plants. And there's the chai, this is animals. And there's Medaber. Medaber is mankind. We know this from Bereshit, Perek Beis, Pasuk Zayin, V'hayil Adam Lenefesh Chaya. And Hashem made us into a living spirit. And the Targum Onkelos says, Ruach Memalala, a speaking spirit. So we are the Medaber, we're the highest level of existence. So the Maharal says, what happens is the plants take nourishment And it's not just physical nourishment, it's spiritual nourishment, spiritual energy from the inanimate, the domim. And then the animals eat the plants, and they elevate that to a chai, to a moving, living, animate object. But then we take the animals, Rabbosai, and we elevate that even further into a medaber, into a speaking, a ruch mamalala, something even higher than a living animal is mankind. So what's happening is an Amma Aretz isn't any higher than an animal. So when he eats meat, he doesn't elevate it spiritually. He doesn't bring it to the next level in Maharal's chain of creation. He doesn't ascend it to the next level because he's not really a Ruch Mamala. And you understand, Ruch Mamala just means a speaking spirit, but it's deeper than that. And this is what I think. This is from me. I'm not relying on something, but I think what Unkelos means, Ruch Mamala, it's not just speaking, because you see animals communicate. Dogs bark and birds sing, and they communicate. But man has a deeper communication. Man's communication is for improvement, for self-improvement, for spiritual growth, self-actualization. When we learn a Gemara and we talk about it with each other, we're growing in wisdom. We're coming together to grow in wisdom. Our communication one to another, it's not simply to find food and avoid danger, it's to build our collective body of wisdom. Our whole Torah, our whole civilization is based on the fact that we can share our wisdom, our information, our knowledge, our insight with one another, and we can also write it down and save it and pass it on to our children, our students, the next generation. We don't have this by animals. Animals don't write down what they've learned and pass it on to the next generation. There's no concept of this. They don't share wisdom and insight and philosophy one to another. They communicate. True, they communicate, but they're not growing in insight and developing intellectual power. So that's like the Amaretz. He's not really developing. My Rosh Hashivas, that's all he said. He said, if you see a young boy and he's 4 or 5 years old and he's playing, it's beautiful, it's nice, it's very good. He's a young boy, beautiful. If you come back in 5 years and he's exactly the same, it's a tragedy. He hasn't changed. A 10-year-old should be different than a 5-year-old. And if you come back in 5 years and this 10-year-old, a beautiful, normal 10-year-old, if he hasn't changed and he's 15, it's a problem. Something's wrong. And then he said to us, you guys are 20 years old. If I come back and you're 25 and you haven't changed, something wrong. Yeah, it's a big musser. But you see, by animals are the same. They rely on instincts. An animal that's 1 year old, 2 years old, 5 years old, they haven't changed what they're doing. They're still doing things. They're still on their instincts. Only mankind changes over time. And this is the problem with the Amma Aretz, why he shouldn't eat basar. He's not developing. He's not growing. He's not getting through Shas. He's ignorant of his ignorance. He doesn't feel inclined to learn, to get better, to grow. Baruch Hashem, all here in Daf Yomi, we're all growing one daf at a time through Shas. It's really something to think about. Am I going to be different? If I came back a year from now, 5 years from now, have I grown any? Am I doing something different? Have I improved my understanding of life and my connection to Hashem? Because that's what makes me Talmid Chacham. That's what's making Osek B'Torah, is I'm a Ruach Mamalala. I'm speaking wisdom, I'm learning wisdom, I'm sharing wisdom, I'm giving it to the next generation. That's Ruach Mamalala. That's what I think Unkelos means, Ruach Mamalala, and what the Maharal means with, you have to elevate the meat to the next level. Otherwise, Rabbi said, meat is murder. Because what right do we have if we're not any different from animals? What right would we have to slaughter animals? It would just be it would be useless. So that's the Maharal, and that's the Unkelos, and that's my drasha on self-improvement based on shchutei chutz. And you understand also shchutei chutz, you have to bring it to the temple, because even if you were just going to eat it because it's delicious, it's barbecue, if you bring it to the temple, bring it to the Mishkan, then you see the Kohanim, you see the Mizbeach, they're using the dam of the Shlamim on the Mizbeach, and then you eat the meat. It's much more inspirational. You're not just going to, when the Pasuk says later, you're not going to go after the Syrium in the field, you're going to bring it to the temple, it's going to really focus your kavana, that this meat is not just for your stomach, this meat is also for your soul. You're using this energy that went from the inanimate to the plants to the animals into you. You're using it to raise it into a spiritual level. So that's really why we had to bring our meat to the Mishkan in those days. So good, now I can turn over to Amud Beis. Baruch Hashem. So, carbon. So this pasuk said carbon l'Hashem. If it only said carbon, shomeani afilu kodshe bedek habayis, we'd say even bedek habayis shnikru carbon, because bedek habayis is called a carbon. Binyan shenemar v'nokriv es carbon Hashem, because it says we'll bring a carbon to Hashem. We have it's actually a really interesting pasuk. It says v'nakriv es carbon Hashem ish asher matzah kli zahav. So this is after the war with Midian. They brought back all the gold. But what kli zahav did they bring? Etzoda, tzmid, tabat, agil, kumaz, lechaper al nafshotayim lifnei Hashem. It's all golden jewelry. So all the kelim they found was jewelry, and that's kind of weird. So they went to war, they didn't find, it's all golden jewelry. What happened? is the whole war with Midian. This is a preview of coming attractions for Parshas Pinchas. The war with Midian was because these women went and seduced the Jews, and seduced them not only in the bedroom, but through Vodah Zarah, to Baal Peor. And as a result, a lot of Jews died in this sin, and then we went after Midian for revenge. And what happened when we went to war is the women came out too. They came out to war to try to, seduce more Jewish men, or also to come out to become war brides for the Jewish men. And they captured all these golden ornaments they were wearing. And the Rashi explains what these things are. The Etzadat, Samid, Tabat, these earrings, nose rings, bracelets. But the Agil and the Kumaz are actually lingerie. They're golden lingerie that women would wear on her private parts. And the women were wearing these things when they went out to see the war. And it's very strange. And the next pasuk is Ve'ikach Moshe ve'Elazar Kohen et hazochav me'itam kol klei ma'aseh. These are called kli ma'aseh. These are utensils of ma'aseh. So the Sforno explains because they did a ma'aseh of seduction and avodah zarah by this Baal Peor incident. So these things were used to entice and trap Jewish men, and now they became a karban Lashem. So it's very interesting historically. As a historical note, it was absolutely normal during a war for the winning team to take the women of the losing team. Mm-hmm. It's called war brides. It was completely normal. The Greeks did it all the time. The Romans did it all the time. You could look up Rome and the Sabines, Sabine. They're very famous. They would just attack and steal the women, capture them. It was absolutely normal, exactly, absolutely normal in a war for the winning team to take the women from the losing team. The war with Midian is an exception because they bring the women back, and Moshe says, "Why'd you keep these women alive? They were the ones who tempted us and seduced us by Baal Peor." And then they had to go out and punish the women who had been involved in the terrible Maisa of Baal Peor. But it was normal. Otherwise, if it hadn't been for that, it would be normal for them to take the women as war brides. And that's why the women were so dressed up, because you understand, on a historical level, this used to be completely normal, is that if a woman was captured from the losing team in a war, if she looked very nice and she was wearing her golden jewelry and everything, she could be taken as a wife by one of the officers in the army, and that's pretty good existence. If she didn't look very good, she would be a slave. For menial labor, she could be worked to death. So it was good for her survival and her chance to reproduce with the winning team, that she would look good. So they're all wearing gold for that reason. It's not so long ago. We had this during World War II. Is in occupied France and other countries, some of the local women would date or marry the Nazis, and then after the war, there's actually famous pictures of the resistance exposed some of these women for what they did, for their treachery during the war, for going to the German side and shaved off all their hair as a punishment, which is amazing because that's what we do to the Jewish war bride in Ki Tetzei, the Milchama. One of the steps of her conversion process is we shave off her hair of the captured woman when it is mutter. In the case of Midian, it was not mutter to take the women, but in a normal war situation, not that it's a normal situation, that's one of the steps. So it's kind of echoes of the Torah in somewhat recent history, but this war bride thing is real throughout history. It was absolutely normal. But we see from here that these golden utensils, which were to Bedek Abayis, these are not karbanos or side, these golden utensils and golden ornaments from the women were brought were called a karban, even though they're not karban. So if the pasuk had only said you bring a karban, we would have thought it even includes Bedek Abayis. Because it says, Shemar v'nakriv is karban Hashem, etc. That's the golden utensils. Tamad lomar, el pedach el moed lo heviu. Why is he chayav shchutei chutz? Because he didn't bring it to the petach el moed, to the opening of the tent of meeting. Kol ra'ui le petach el moed chayav alav. So anything that's fitting to come into the tabernacle, into the mishkan, that's what he's chayav alav. B'chutz, if he slaughters it b'chutz. Kol she'ena ra'ui le petach el moed, something that's not fitting to come to the entrance of the el moed, ein chayavin alav b'chutz. He's not chayav shchutei chutz. Otzi elu, I would exclude these things. She'ein ra'ui in the petach el moed. These things that are Bedek Abayis or Bosai for the temple upkeep, they're not really to come to the Mishkan. Rashi actually explains, it's very interesting. He says, Koche Bedek Abayis lo hayu atidim lavo lepetach el moed. You don't bring it inside. And then he also says, Stam Koche Bedek Abayis bali muminhen. He says, usually, if you're bringing an animal, you're donating an animal to the temple, it's because it's a bal mum. Because a mapis tamimim lebedek abayis, he brings the Gemara in Tamura, a mapis tamimim lebedek abayis. If you try to donate a tam animal, an animal that would be fitting as a karban to bedek abayis, over ba'aseh. He doesn't really like that pshat. The second pshat, he likes the first pshat better, but we don't donate an animal that could go on the mizbeach to bedek abayis. There was had a discussion about this in Tamura, discussions about this, but stam, these things don't come to bedek abayis, does not come into the ohel moed itself. V'lo etzi parat chatat, and I would not exclude parat chatat, sir mishtaleach, and the sir lazazel. So now we're getting back to Yom Kippur. I would not use this pasuk to exclude parat chatat. That's a para aduma, and the sir mishtaleach. Rashi takes out para aduma. He says, I don't understand why you would think that para aduma comes into the Mishkan or the temple. We know, remember, it had a ramp. They built a big ramp. Every Kohen Gadol built a big ramp between the temple and the Har Hazeitim, where they did the avoda of the paraduma. There was a big ramp connecting them, but you never brought the paraduma into the temple itself until you had made it into mechatas, into the water for sprinkling. So shahu ra'i levo el petach moed. So we wouldn't exclude the parat chatat. The Rashi takes it out. The Sir Mishtaleach, that they would come from the petach moed. Talmudar lashem. So we have karban. Any karban is mashma, even bedek abayis. Then we have lashem. Only karban is lashem. Mishi michali lashem. Things that are special for Hashem, Yatsu Eilu, that excludes these, the Parat Chatat and Sir Mishtaleach, Shem Yuchali L'Shem. They're not really for Hashem, they're not really a carbon. L'Shem, V'Lashem, L'Hotzihu, is L'Shem an exclusionary term? So L'Shem is only for Hashem, it's always exclusionary. We're going to see it's not always like this. Or Minhu, we have a Kasha Yerotze, L'Karbon Ishe L'Shem. Now this is our famous pasuk about Mechuzar Zman, about a young newborn animal. The pasuk says, Shor o Chesiv o Ez, if your ox or your sheep or your goat, ki yivaled, mazel tov, v'haya shivas yamim, the newborn animal has to be 7 days, tachat imo, under its mother, miyom shmini v'holo, yiratze, the carbon shel Hashem. From the 8th day and on, it can be yiratze, it can be accepted as a carbon ishel Hashem, as a carbon for the fires of Hashem. So here too we have the word carbon and the word Lashem. Just like we have by Shchulei Hutz, carbon Lashem, here too we have carbon and Lashem. So let's see how Chazal understands this pasuk. Yiratze the carbon ishel Hashem, elu ishim. So this is only animals that can go to the fire, that go up on the Mizbeach as karbanot. That's where Mechuzar Zman applies, or need to wait for the 8th day and on. Menayin shelo yakdishu Mechuzar Zman. So how do we know you can't even be makdish a Mechuzar Zman before the right time? Talmud Lomar carbon Lashem. Has to be a carbon Lashem. Talmud Lomar carbon Lashem, and now Lashem is the Rabbos. So Lashem, originally in our pasuk of Shulei Hutz, Lashem excludes Sir Mishtaleach Parat Chatat. Here Lashem includes Hashem the Rabbo, Sir Mishtaleach. Here we include Sir Mishtaleach in Mechuzar Zman. You can't pick as your Sir Mishtaleach a 7-day-old animal. It must be 8 days or more. Amarava chasam miyana dekra, acham miyana dekra. So there by Shchulei Hutz, read Lashem in context. And Lashem in context excludes these things that are not Dafka Lashem as karbanot. And by the pasuk of Mechuzar Zman, by the 8-day-old animals, 8 days and on, it's good. Read it in context. Chasam de el petach l'rabot Lashem. So Chasam by Shchulei Hutz. So I'm getting ahead of the Gemara. The El Petach L'Rabot Hashem L'Chotzi. So bringing it to the door of the Mishkan, that includes these things. The Sir Mishlech Parat Chatat L'Hashem L'Chotzi. Hashem would exclude them. Hacha de Ishe L'Chotzi. For the fire would exclude a Sir Mishlech Parat Chatat because it's not a carbon, it's not on the Mizbech. L'Hashem L'Rabot. But Hashem would include those for the halacha of Mechuzar Zman. They have to be 8 days and up. So it's interesting, by a bris, we do the bris on the 8th day, but the night before, it's interesting because we say technically you could be makdish on the night before. You can't bring a carbon until the daytime, but technically the night before that carbon, you could be makdish it already because you've already reached the 8th day, even though it's not daytime yet. So what we do before a bris milah is there's a leil shimurim, we say. And there's a minhag, some people read from the Zohar, they bring kids to say Shema, whatever it is. By the Sfardim, they have Brit Yitzchak, and they're learning and singing by the baby, and it's sort of a shmira, because in a sense, the baby is mechusar, it's lacking in a milah. Yes, we can't do the milah until day 8, but Yom Shmini, Mimo Basar Lato. But even the night before, you've reached day 8, but it's not daytime yet, there's sort of this concept of it needs sort of a shmira. So it's an interesting thing that we learn out. Miyam Shmini, Behola, Yiratzeh. Time of the Rabbi Rahmana. So the reason that is because the Torah has included the Sir Mishtaleach in being Mechuzar Zman. If we didn't have this Lashem to include Sir Mishtaleach, we'd think that even a 7-day-old Sir Mishtaleach would be old enough. Halo Rabbi, even if the Torah had not said it, Havamina Sir Mishtaleach Kadosh b'Mechuzar Zman. We could have said a 7-day-old Sir Mishtaleach is a kosher Sir Mishtaleach. But there's another reason to know that's not true. Eina gorel kaveya elabroi l'shem. The gorel cannot pick your sir l'shem and your sir mishtaleach only if the sir mishtaleach is also kosher to be sir l'shem. Remember, you don't know which goat is which. When you pick up your 2 goats and you bring them to do hagrola, and one is going to be sir l'shem and one is going to be sir l'zazel, both of them have to be kosher as a sir Lashem. They can't be a bal mum. They have to be a matching pair, but they can't be a bal mum. They have to be the right time. They have to be 8 days up and up. So why do we need the pasuk to include sir mishtaleach and mechuzar zman? We know it because you can't do hagrala with something that's not fit to be a sir Lashem. Rav Yosef, Hamani Chanan Mitzri, this teaching is going like Chanan Mitzri. Chanan Mitzri would need this Lashem to include the Sir Mishtalech, the Sir Lazazel from Mechuzar Zman, because he wouldn't necessarily hold that it must be matching. Titania, Chanan Mitzri Omer. Chanan Mitzri says on our Mishnah, Afilu Dam Bakos, even if the Dam of the Sir Lashem was been collected in the Kos, Mevi Chavero. And what happened to Nebuch, the Sir Mishtalech died at a heart attack when it saw where it was going, and it passed away. So he says, Mevi Chavero, Umizaveg Lo. You can just bring another Sir Mishtalech from the Shuk and match them up and Mazel Tov. Then you could go on and use the blood. He would say you don't need a new animal. It's the opposite of Rabbi Yehuda we saw in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda in our Mishnah said they're linked. He said the Sir Mishtalech dies, then you have to spill out the blood. And if the blood is spilled, the Sir Mishtalech has to go out to die. You need a matched pair. Hanan Mitzvah says the opposite. It says even if the blood is in the kos and the Sir Mishtalech dies, you can bring a new Sir Mishtalech and just pair it up with the blood. You don't need, it's mashma, you don't need a new pair. Amar, the Shamat Le Hanan Mitzri, the Leis Le Dechuyin. So you can say, we heard from Hanan Mitzri, he doesn't hold by Dechui. Dechui means pushed aside. That means if the Sir Mishtalech passes away, then the blood in the kos, according to Hanan Mitzri, is not Dechui. It's not pushed away. You can still use the blood in the kos. The Leis Le Hagrala, Mishamas Le, have you really heard that he doesn't hold by Hagrala? So maybe Hanan Mitzri says, good, you can keep the blood in the kos, but what you have to do is what our Mishnah yesterday suggested, that if one animal dies, you bring a new pair. You bring 2 goats, and then you say, if this one from whichever one goes Lazazel, that will be the replacement for Azazel, and you match it up with the Dam and the Kos. So he says the Dam and the Kos isn't Dachui, but maybe he does hold you need a Hagrala. So it's not really a proof that you don't need this that according to Hanan Mitzri, you would need this pasuk for the Mechuzar Zman V'Sir Mishtalech. So Dilma Maisi Magro, maybe he brings another pair and he does another Hagrala for Hanan Mitzri. Elam Rav Yosef, Hamani, who is this teacher who needs the pasuk of Lashem in Mechusar Zman to say you can't bring a newborn Sir Mishtalech? Rabbi Shimon, the Tanya, there's a brisa which teaches, Meis Echad Mahem, one of these goats dies. Mevi Chavero Shelo Begrola, you can bring another goat without a Hagrala. Divrei Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says you don't even need a Hagrala, you could just bring a pair from the Shuk and match it up with the other goat, and you'd be good to goat. Ravina Amar Kigon Shehumam says, no, it's the Sir Mishtalech got a mum. V'chilalu al acher, and you were machalo the designation of the Sir Lazazo onto a different Sir. How do you know a mum is pasul by Sir Mishtalech? We understand a carbon can't have a mum, but a Sir Mishtalech, it's not a carbon, it's going off the cliff. Tanya, the Brisa teaches, let's see, we have the pasuk here. Averet Shavor o Harutz o Yabelet o Garav, these different mumim. O Yalefet lo takrivu ele lashem. You can't offer these mums to Hashem. V'shelo titnu behem al mizbeach lashem. And on the fires, you can't give them on the mizbeach of Hashem. So it's kind of a 2-part pasuk. You can't bring these mum to Hashem, and you can't put them on the fire as a carbon for Hashem. So Ishelo titnu behem elo achalovim. This is the chalovim, the chalav of these animals. You can't even put the parts of these animals that would normally go on the mizbeach of a bal mum onto the mizbeach. And the ela kulan, I would only know if you had all of the mums. Miktsatan minayin, how do you know if it has only one of the mum? Talmud Lamar mayhem, from one of them. If it has any of these mum, then it can't go up on the mizbeach at all. Mizbeach zozrika damim. And the mizbeach, this includes even throwing the dam. Even the dam of a bal mum, you can't do zrikas dam on the mizbeach. It's excluded from that use. Lashem, and when it says Lashem, it says Lashem twice. Eile Lashem, this is Eisha Lutitnu Behem Al Mizbeach Lashem, the Rabbo Sir Mishtaleach. So this includes even a Sir Mishtaleach with a mum is not a good Sir Mishtaleach. It's trich, and we need both. The Michtav. It's trich the Michtav Bal Mum. The Torah has to write a Bal Mum is not good with Sir Mishtaleach. It's trich the Michtav Mechuzar Zman. It also has to write Mechuzar Zman. That this Lashem by Mechuzar Zman includes Sir Mishtaleach. If it only taught us Mechuzar Zman, Bishum Delo Mate Zimne. Or the time has not arrived. So Mechuzar Zman, maybe it's not so bad because it would be a carbon, simply the time has not arrived for it to become a carbon. Aval Bal Mum, but a Bal Mum, the Mate Zmane, its time has arrived. It reached the level of being a carbon, and then Nebuch later on it got a mum, but it was a valid carbon at one time. A Malo, maybe it's not such a problem because it was kosher at one time before it got the mum. Because of Rechmana Balmum, if the Torah only wrote a Balmum is excluded from Sir Mishtaleach, Mishum Demais. That's disgusting to bring a Balmum. To bring a Balmum into the temple, it's not right. As Rashi says, a Balmum could be a Bedek Abayis, but to bring it into the temple, it's just mice, it's disgusting. It's simply not time yet. It's not really a problem in the animal, it's just a problem in the timing. If you wait a couple days, it's kosher. That's why it has to write both. We're gonna keep going here because it's on the same topic. Rava Amar, top of 64. So what's the problem with the Sir Mishtaleach? Someone was sick at home. And what do? Shratat imo. They slaughtered the mother of the Sir Mishtaleach b'Yom Kippur to feed the chola. The chola had some sort of sickness that required fresh meat. They needed fresh meat for the chola at some sort of, you understand, maybe low iron, maybe anemia, maybe something going on. Needed fresh meat for the chola. That was the prescription. And what animal did they have in the house? The mother of the Sir Mishtaleach. And then we know there's an Isser, Oso v'es B'nai. So if you slaughtered the mother, you can't slaughter the child on the same day. So now you have a problem. You can't bring the Sir Mishtaleach. Now it's Mechusar Zman, also the mother. Even if it's more than 8 days old, it's Mechusar Zman because you can't slaughter it Bo Bayom and Yom Kippur because you use the mother. Ki Hai Gavna Mi Aser, is this really Aser? It says, Lo Tishchatu, the pasuk by Oso Nesimo, it says, Shor Osei, Oto v'et b'no lo tishchatu b'yom echad. Lo tishchatu. You can't do a shchita on the son if you already did a shchita on the mother. And what are you doing in Sir Lazazel? That's not in this shchita. Amar Rechmana. So lo tishchatu amar Rechmana b'halav shchita hi. That's not a shchita. It's throwing off a cliff. Ha'ari Marava. But in the West they said dachiato letzuk, throwing it off the cliff. Zo hi shchitato. That is the shchita for the Sir Mishtaleach. We actually have the same thing by fish. Remember in Chulin, fish and grass are fish. Yeah. Fish don't need shchita. Technically, you can pull the fish out of the water in the net. Technically, you could eat it. Now, we don't eat them when they're alive because that's disgusting. It's al tishaksat nafshatechem. We don't eat living creatures. But you just wait till it stops flopping and you could eat fresh fish. You don't have to shech your fish. I don't know where you would cut the neck. I mean, that's fairly... So we say in the Gemara in Chulin, asifatan zohi shechitatan, gathering them from their place in the water, that is their shechita. We say the same by kosher grasshoppers. We say the same by the cicadas are not kosher. Do not eat your cicadas. We say it's also by the malika of a bird. We say the malikasa zohi shechitasa. When we do a malika of the birds in the temple, we say that's a shchita, lagabe, the bird in the temple, that the carcass isn't mitame. Normally, a bird if you do malika outside the temple, you simply kill the bird, it's tame, because it's a nevela. But in the temple, we say the malika is the shchita. So here too, throwing this Sir Lazazel off the cliff counts as its shchita, not that you can eat it, God forbid, but that perhaps it's not mitame as a nevela. If you went down and touched the corpse, it wouldn't be mitame, because it's the equivalent to shchita, just like the malika of the bird. So that's very interesting by the shchita. One other point, there's a tshuva of the Nodi Yehuda, and they asked him if it's good to hunt, if it's okay to hunt. He says, Me'ikar Din, it's mutter if you understand, if you hunt, you're usually not eating the meat because they've shot the animal or something like this. Only by David HaMelech we found he hunted, the Gemara says he hunted with arrows. He would do shchita with his arrows. He used like a broad tip arrow and he would shoot right into the veins, right into the arteries, do shchita. So perhaps this hunting is they would shoot the animal in the leg and then go over with a knife and do shchita. You have to hit it in the leg. We learned in Chulin, the lower leg, so it's not going to become a treifa. You just want to get it trapped or something, hunted, where it's not going to be able to run away. They can do a kosher shchita. Or if he's just hunting animals, he's going to sell the skins or sell the meat to non-Jews. So they asked Nodi Yehuda if it's mutter. He says, really, he goes through all the shailas. Tsar Balei Chayim is not a problem if it's the tzorech adam. Just like we push the Sir Lazazel off a cliff because it's the tzorech kapara of Am Yisrael. So he says hunting, if it's needed for someone's parnasa, needed for the people to eat the meat, it's not a problem with Tsar Balei Chayim if humans need it. He says really the problem is a hashkafic problem. All the hunters in Tanakh were Rishayim, Nimrod, Esav. It's not something that a Jew should do. And he says also you put yourself into a sakana with wild animals and things like this. But he says Me'ikar Din, technically hunting is mutter if it's letzorech, if it's needed, but it's not something nice Jewish boys actually should do. So it's similar to shchut echutz. It's like spilling blood outside the temple. It's like you're spilling blood, but not for a holy purpose, not for purpose of elevating your neshama, elevating that meat into something higher. Chazak v'ruch shkoyach, Rabbi Osai.